The key thing we are asking for as Africans here is that those that have been responsible for causing the problem of global warming and climate change should cut these emissions drastically, and they should cut it from now. I mean, the action time is now. So that's the first thing we're asking for. And the second thing, we're asking for finance. We're saying those that have been historically responsible for the problem should be the ones in the forefront to fix the problem. How do they fix it? It's about providing resources, for providing money for poor African governments to be able to have resources that they design those community-based adaptation programs. Basically, for example, in Malawi, supporting farmers to do irrigation, because in the absence of enough rain-fed agriculture, they need to supplement production from a little bit of irrigation, so which is basically winter cropping, a little bit of technology of how they can harvest water, how they can divert water from rivers and store it in a dam and use it for production, so that in the event that the rains have not come, or there's a season of a drought, or there were insufficient rains, they can still cope and produce food. Yeah. I know there are a lot of skepticism around this whole process, but we think since Bali 2 years ago, when we agreed that within these 2 years we're just going to focus on shaping out an outcome that has to be concluded in this conference in Copenhagen, our hope and enthusiasm has always grown. And we are hopeful that there's no other time ever in history where we have a huge consensus around the reality of climate change other than now. We know and understand the challenges that come along with addressing climate change, but we are hopeful and we are sure that Copenhagen should deliver the much needed promise for those poor Africans that are suffering, every day, going out hungry, not able to send children to school because there's no food in the house. And so we believe that the world over, we all agree that this is an opportune time for us to address climate change. But we see that the African governments have been so united than ever before around climate change. It is all because I think there is an equally shared understanding now within Africa that we will no longer exist if this problem is not fixed, and if we handle it individually, there might not be that needed strength that we need. This increased shared understanding around impacts of climate change and the agency to address the problem comes from particularly two issues. One is the science provided by an intergovernmental panel which African governments are part of, which is called the IPCC. But basically this is a body that on behalf of governments looks at the available science. And so in their recent report, they have indicated that if we don't do any action, it will be difficult to address the problem of climate change in the future if we don't do any actions now. And so that calls for the agency, because the science is well understood now broadly within Africa and beyond, that this is the time to do something. And secondly, it's about the stories, from community members in most parts of Africa. When people have facilitated a process of looking at how livelihoods systems were in Africa maybe 20 years ago, and how the situation is now. So there is a lot of evidence in terms of the increasing number of droughts and the frequency of droughts, but also increasing number of floods and the frequency of flooding, and the enormous impact that these have had on the lives and livelihoods of people in Africa. So we're losing more lives in each year, and livelihood systems have been disrupted. Families not being able to raise enough food for their children. They can't send them to school because there's no way they can get extra, produce to sell to buy school fees and pay pay for the school uniform. So there's increased evidence, from the stories of people within Africa. So these two, the science combined with the people's stories, have really reached a point where they've conclusively, given the evidence for us negotiators and even negotiators in other parts of the world, that climate change is real. And so that's where the agency to address climate change is coming from.